I just told Bonnie, I said, this is so pretentious to have. It's not my forte, so to speak. But nevertheless, that's going down. We're sorry. We are trying something. We are experimenting to see if we can avoid what has happened the last couple of Sundays at the conclusion of worship. Because I would like to be able to greet most of you after service. If you have your Bibles and your New Testaments with you this morning, we're going to dive right in. Turn to Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5, we will read our text and then we will go from there. Obviously, chapter 5 is the beginning of what we call regularly the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7. And I want to begin reading in verse 13. As Jesus says, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything, except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. It's a common phrase for us now. Perhaps it's a phrase you've used or a phrase that you've heard used by others, in which they describe someone as being what? The salt of the earth. It may be a common phrase in our day, but when Jesus spoke these words, it was an unbelievable statement. Remember the ordinary persons to whom this phrase was first addressed. 12 individuals who had only recently been called from the shops and shorelines of Galilee. Not one of them, not a single one of them, had a resume that would somehow recommend them for a special status. Indeed, they were more like the dust of the earth than its salt. Even the Greek text reveals the surprise of these 12 being designated as salt. Because in the Greek text, it places the word you at the first of the sentence and then repeats it within the verb, literally translating the phrase, you, of all persons, you. The surprise is there because of the next words, the salt of the earth. At the time, Israel's scriptures, the Torah, the words of instruction from God were known as salt. That important text preserved the distinct ways of God's people, provided Israel with seasoned taste of eternity. And now Jesus is amending that by declaring that simple, unlearned mortals are also preservers of the holy identity. They are also a taste of the kingdom to come. And if that's not enough, there's more. Like building some ascending, carefully crafted drama, Jesus speaks his final surprise when he says, you are the salt of the earth. If anyone had previously thought that this Nazarene preacher was simply some flash in the pan, here was a jarring wake-up call. Because you see, Jesus now has shared that he is more in view than just the people called Israel. He's talking about the whole earth. Everybody. In short, he's daring to fill the ears of his inner circle with these grandiose ideas about the hope of the whole earth residing in them. It's interesting that the words of Jesus have never been heard as a once-upon-a-time pronouncement only to that inner circle of 12, or even the multitudes who were eavesdropping on that teachings. Followers of Jesus for over 2,000 years have always felt that Jesus was looking them specifically in the eye, specifically in the eye, speaking these words directly to them. You. Yes, you are the salt of the earth. I'll be honest and confess that those words are words that continue to be in my face. They're powerful words. Obviously, they're important words. The question is, what exactly do they mean? Well, let's begin with the accepted understanding. That is, salt was associated with the written basis of Israel's identity and way of being the Torah. With that in mind, one twist is that this salt is now being personalized. That is, ordinary human beings are said to be salt. They're said to be living scriptures. In other words, Jesus is now thrusting every human person into the spotlight rather than just hallowed words on a sacred page. There's also the consideration that salt in Jesus' day was the most common of preservatives. Refrigeration is still thousands of years away, and salt was the only way to keep things from spoiling. So in Jesus' words, there is also a declaration concerning Earth's preservation, the whole Earth's health. Its viability as a place of habitation is being placed in the hands of common people. But perhaps the most overlooked aspect of the statement is that it is a simple declaration. You are the salt of the earth. There is no you will be the salt of the earth. There is no you must be the salt of the earth. It's an amazing present tense statement of an existing fact. Jesus isn't issuing orders here. He's declaring what is. He's not giving them something to do. He's telling them who they are. And whatever else this may mean, surely it means that who these people are is important. It's their personhood that is the primary issue. As significant as their speech and deeds might subsequently be, it's their being and not their doing that is the most important, most essential. Their intrinsic character and their integrity as disciples is to open for all to see. Which means this: once you and I decide to become a Christ follower, who we are can't be in question for long. Once we decide to become a follower of Jesus Christ, who we are really shouldn't be in question. Okay? Because something salty, something of the character of Jesus needs to be detected in the lives that we're living. A salt person brings a different flavor to the party, a seasoning that cannot be missed or mistaken. And through that distinctiveness, the whole earth finds its hope. However, before you and I get too excited about how important we are, we need to go back to the sobering center of the whole matter. Jesus spoke as though this is already a done deal. And I can only find one plausible explanation for Jesus' preposterous conferring of salt status upon people whom he knew were as hard-headed and as self-centered as any of Adam's other children. That is, Jesus is trusting in God's transforming powers to be at work. In short, Jesus believed that by simply being with him, they and us could and would be different. You see, Jesus, I think, believed that by rubbing shoulders with him, that would affect changes in their character and also in our character. Jesus believed that the commonest of clay could and would begin to radiate the brilliance of eternity because of our proximity to Him. That's important. So he spoke from a confidence in God, declaring this anticipated accomplishment of God as a fact that it has already happened. He says, you are the salt of the earth. But not because of your moral superiority. You're the salt of the earth because God is creating you to be salt of the earth through Jesus Christ. And the significance of this is that moments spent with Jesus are the most essential moments in the life of a disciple of Jesus. In other words, the more time we spend with Him, the better it is for us. Only in daily time and alertness before Jesus does the salty work of reshaping the disciples' character begin to occur. And if those moments are omitted, if we're not spending the time with Jesus that we need to be spending, or even if they're just minimized, as disciples we become nothing but sad disappointments, containers that are labeled salt but possessing only flavorless granules within. Which brings us to the dreaded question for this week that Jesus asks each and every one of us. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? We have to understand that the salt in Jesus' day is far different than the salt we have today. And that when salt was gathered to be used in preserving things to keep them from spoiling, it would often have traces of other minerals that would be gathered in with the salt as well. And as a result, over time, salt would lose its saltiness, thereby becoming worthless, only to be thrown out, for there's no way to make it salty again. Now, having said that, we have all kinds of great technology in the 21st century. Maybe somebody's figuring out a way to make it salty again. But even if it has, or even if it ever becomes a possibility, Jesus' question should still be worrisome to each and every one of us. What do we do? What do we do? Because after all, when character and distinctiveness and inner integrity are lost, what's left? Which brings us to the issue. Before Jesus' disciples, and subsequently before the church, can be the salt of the earth, we have to confront Jesus' alternatives. It's either going to be integrity or there's going to be irrelevance. Integrity or irrelevance. We have to answer the question, do we really want to give unmistakable evidence that we are followers of an outcast? Do we really want to give unmistakable evidence that we are followers of a one person who was 2,000 years ago totally unwanted? An individual who is still in trouble with a capital T whenever he's taken seriously? That's the question that we face. And here's the thing. After considering the questions of Jesus, which we've looked at in recent weeks, it's tough. Are we of more value to God than the birds of the air? It's a question about value. Why are we more obsessed with judging the speck of sawdust in another person's eye than we're concerned about the plank in our own eye? It's a question about judging others. What reward is there in loving only those who love us? It's a question about relationships. As we saw last week, why are we so afraid? And why do we still have no faith? It's a question about fear. And to be honest with you, when I have looked at these questions and when I've considered the questions, I've often found myself seeking refuge from the intensifying heat of the questions that Jesus asked. I really would like to remain off stage, quite honestly. Just let me hide out in the wings. However, let me quickly add that even in times of my wanting to hide off stage, I've been shown something significant. What I have learned is that I'm not always comfortable with God's grace. To be told you are the salt of the earth is nothing more than a gift of God's grace. To be told you are the salt of the earth is a promotion from anonymity to visibility. But that also means it's a gift that places me in my life onto a larger, earth-sized stage. Because suddenly, my spiritual comfort zone is invaded. Jesus is somehow defining me as 3 times larger than I really want to be. In fact, it's a gift that I'd be more than happy to return to the giver, except for one problem. Here it is, right in my face. You see, I'm learning that grace is more than just mercy. Grace is also a compliment. Grace is also an implicit affirmation. Grace means that God thinks we are important. Grace means that God thinks we are a desired partner in the work of reconciling all things to Him. And Jesus' appearance among us showed us this truth, and His self-pronouncement cements it. Only our self-despising rejects it, inappropriately acting modest when God says, stand up and walk and talk and be the salt of the earth that I make you to be. One of discipleship's toughest tasks for me has come to be to accept the compliment of God's grace. I mean, I prepared for God's frown. I'm prepared for God to shake His finger at me, telling me everything I'm doing wrong. But His smile, it frightens me. And I find myself shrinking back, overwhelmed by the unexpected compliment of God's vote of confidence, calling me to a higher self, calling me to a greater usefulness. Here's the thing. Living in the way of grace means that we let Jesus define us. Not the demographers, not sociologists, not the trend setters, not the educators, not even family and friends. You and I are called to live into the self that God sees and declares for each and every one of us. Or to allow Him to love the less than salty out of us, to love out of us the worry and the pettiness, to love out of us the anger and the hate and the fear. And we are to begin to allow Him to mold the better stuff within us. And day by day, choice by choice, moment by moment, we are afforded the opportunity to become what He says we are. And after all, if He once turned water into wine, surely it shouldn't be that impossible for Him to make a saving salt out of the likes of us. I'm going to let you know a little secret. In truth, I know it isn't impossible. I know it because of what I see when I'm in the presence of some people. That often is not, regardless of what they're doing, it's who they are that attracts me. Because they're just different in a way. They're different in a way that makes it easy to say of them, so-and-so's the salt of the earth. They're the salt of the earth. And their very being persuades me that God, who is already wonderfully at work in some people, can enter into each of us and make us all that Jesus says we are. And for that, I am grateful.